what was your Hockey Canada takeaway?
Where do we begin?
Well, like, does everyone have to go?
Frank wants.
Everyone under the like.
Don't be coy.
They got a clean house here, don't they?
I think they do. I think it's right at the very top with Scott Salmon, and it's arrogance is what it is.
Yeah.
Look, Hockey Canada deserves a ton of credit for decades of excellence. But the game, it's not just that the game has changed, the landscape has changed. You know, someone had said to me last night, a prominent hockey person, hey, I can't believe it took the U.S. this long to win back-to-back golds. And I said, well, did you realize that at the World Juniors, the U.S. didn't win at all until 2004? Rhett's career was almost over by then.
That was the Marc-Andre Fleury. Oh, that was
2004.
We kicked the shit out of the Americans in Boston.
Forever.
That was a year, 96.
The U.S. has now won 3 of the last 5. They've won 7 times in the 21 years since the first one. And it's not just the U.S. This isn't me as American here with my U.S. patch
you
on.
have insight. I don't want to interrupt you, but you have insight into what USA Hockey does and how they approach things compared to Hockey Canada. And they're vastly different.
Well, we could talk about the American development model and small area games and a million other coaching
Single year
things.
birth hockey.
Yep.
You just play against your kids your age. You're not forced to climb the ladder too fast. There's all kinds of little things that I clearly have an opinion on because I've lived it both now. And I'm
it's not perfect.
No, there's no perfect. But there are things that Hockey Canada just ignores because they've been the best for so long.
It's not just that. It in this specific tournament this year, it was Hockey Canada and Scott Salmon and the management team there saying, we know better than all these other NHL GMs. We're going to purposely leave off from camp and cut fantastic players who are some of the best in the world and top 10 NHL draft picks because we're smarter than you. Yeah. And that's the problem, is that when you do that and then you trot out after the tournament and you say, yeah, we'd pick the same team over again, is essentially what the first press conference was. Then there was so much blowback that they had to come out again and he had to then take the bullets for it. Well, you told us how you felt the first time around. The truth serum, you did that to yourself. You doubled down on the mistakes you made, which just further proves my point about the arrogance. And it's not just Beckett Seneca or Andrew Crystal or all the other guys that could have been there. It was the coaching selection. It was the in-tournament stuff. It was you want to talk about your team being exhausted. You guys ran the longest training camp of any team leading up to it. So you guys had the best hotel, the best schedule, the best food, the best locker room, the best everything, and it meant nothing.
Yeah, and that's kind of where, like, I don't, when you talk about USA versus Canada, if they took their best players, I still think we should really be watching the best rivalry in the history of hockey, potentially, in USA and Canada. We're going to get a taste of the men, all ages, in a couple months or whatever the Four Nations is. And I know people aren't excited, but what makes me excited about that tournament is that we should be watching the 2 greatest hockey nations on earth go head to head, and the Americans literally trying to topple a country that's dominated the sport since it was invented here.
My point is if Hockey Canada is not realizing at the junior level that they're getting passed by, just wait, because it's going to catch up at the very best. Just look at the sheer number of American players as percentage of NHL.
Keeps climbing.
It keeps, and I'm not, again, this isn't a USA thing or USA's, but nothing like that at all. There's been a leveling of the playing field here. It's dead nuts even at the junior level, probably, when you consider it right now and moving forward. The US, it's cyclical. You're going to have down years. The U.S. at some point is going to have more teenagers playing in the NHL. The crutch that Canada can hang on is that the Connor Bedards and Macklin Celebrinis are playing in the NHL, and that's great. That'll all change too. But it's changing, and you can't get to the point when you think that you're so good that you can just say, we're going to leave these guys off because we can.
That's the issue. It's not that we don't see that other nations are catching up to Canada. It's that you're losing and finishing 5th and not bringing your best players. That's the part in the arrogance that's got everyone irate. No one's mad at these kids. If you made the team, congrats. It's how does this management team have the audacity to stay out there after 2 years, 5th in a row and say, yeah, we wouldn't change anything? Like, how bleeping arrogant is that?
But it's that arrogance, and I don't say that's not, again, not a result thing to gloat. It's that arrogance has pervaded the entire federation.
Yeah.
For decades. Just go back to the sexual assault scandal and everything else that was attached to that. That told you something about the way they operated. And then now they're back like nothing ever happened. And the on-ice part of it is still suffering from the same arrogance that they didn't feel a need to clean house from when they should have then.
Snip, snip.
Good take, Dean. You gotta have. I know you're a big Hockey Canada guy.
Oh,
Can I say something else that really bothered me?
Yeah.
And Rhett, I'd love your take because you've lived on both sides of the border. And I get the whole idea of like, does Michigan cheer for Ohio State? It's just the anti-American sentiment in that building yesterday in Canada, US, Finland kind of bothers me.
Yeah, no one watches that tournament once Canada's out, so we have no idea what you're talking about.
I honestly have no clue what you're talking about.
Oh,
My
so
wife's American, and she
people were
texts me
actively cheering for Finland and against the US in that.
Well, they were the underdogs. That's a cuter story.
I mean,
I think the Americans.
That's why I prefaced it with the Michigan-Ohio State thing because, like, a rivalry is a rivalry, and I get it.
Totally.
But if the U.S. isn't in it,
the fans would have cheered for
Canada
anybody
all day
playing the
long.
Americans,
100%,
regardless whether they were
underdogs.
No, it has nothing to do with underdogs.
But okay, that's not. I'll rephrase. The Americans walk around with a swagger that they do at the Olympics and like they do everywhere. It's why Americans.
What we do with this game,
yeah,
Canadians have that with this game of hockey.
Similar.
We can put in two teams. We're the best.
You're naive.
We have it.
It's not as high.
If you even look at the 90s with like the Roenics and the Chelios, it's like I don't recall Canadians anywhere near that sort of
just humble
drip.
pie.
What's that?
Humble pie.
What are we talking
Gracious winners, just aw shucks, who us?
No, there's just another like.
I mean, we just talked about it for 5 minutes. You had no argument with Frank's take on the arrogance of the approach from Hockey Canada.
Yeah, it's a different arrogance.
For this,
totally. Yeah, like I think the Federation was incredibly great. I didn't watch the Canadian hockey players and think they're arrogant. Federation absolutely is. Canadians love hating American hockey players. This is a new Frank. What are you?
Well, that's
you're there in '96.
It's pervasive across the entire NHL. It just, I mean, whether anyone wants to acknowledge it or not, there's still a ton of anti-American sentiment.
Guess that means you're good.
And there's so many of you. You know, there's like a couple 100,000 of us up here.
Plus this new president said he's going to make us the 51st. Like,
yeah,
come on.
I think Brett's excited.
Coming from guy wearing a Texas hat today.
Made our guy quit.
Willie.
Yeah.
Willie.
Yeah.
No, and I think one of the important pieces here is you can't spread the game of hockey in Canada. It's everywhere. The U.S. in the last 20 years done a very good job of getting it into markets it hasn't been. And you've got great teams in Sunbelt that hockey was not a thing 25 years.
Numbers alone,
participation's way up over the last
take over.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote that story on Thanksgiving a few weeks ago about how
Canadian or American Thanksgiving?
U.S. Thanksgiving, the better of the two holidays.
See, there has arrogance.
You can't even argue that. That just look at the participation numbers alone.
Yeah,
there's 12% fewer Canadian boys playing hockey compared to 10 years ago.
Yeah, down.
It doesn't sound like a lot, 12%. You're like, oh, okay, but that's if you add up between Canada and the U.S., there's like 45,000 fewer players today than there were 10 years ago.
This is maybe too boring and too deep, but you go back far enough in Canada, it was really good. I lived it. I grew up in a town of 250 people. What was in that town?
Hockey.
A hockey rink. And what did you do from morning, noon, and you went to the rink? Soon as it was cold enough for the ice to freeze, you lived in the rink. The small towns are smaller. The cost of hockey is staggeringly
That's the biggest
higher. And yes, and of course it's going down.
Yeah, hockey's not getting cheaper. It's not becoming more affordable.
But it's not even growing that much in the US. In that same period of time, it's up 1.9%.
Yeah.
Well,
The reason I wrote it was to say, as a whole, we need to stop with the US Canada thing and actually find a way to work together to fix it.
All right.
Is he building bridges here, Frank? Are you
I'm
unified?
You want us to be the 51st state too? You're like,
You're trying to hoodwink us.
God, this Canada, get him out of there.
Make Canada great again.
Maka.
Love can build a bridge.
I think this is actually going to help this tournament that's got no buzz. I really do. In February.
It's going to be great.
No, but it helps that there's controversy around it. I do. I think.
Do you think
the
it adds
rivalry
pressure to Team Canada?
It should, whether they're related or not. It should. It's a federation that could not have its stock any lower. When was a lower time for Hockey Canada's history?
Okay, so then we've it's very convenient and fun to point out everybody's faults. I have two. I'll admit to them. How are we fixing these? Team Canada.
Take your best
Hockey
players.
Canada.
That's an easy one.
Okay.
So that's one fix.
But remember, it was a big thing.
That's a debatable thing, though, right? It's very easy to say, take the best players. Okay, well, who are they?
Well, I mean, I think the junior roster was not hard to debate. They didn't take the best players.
Well,
I agree
here's the
with you
thing.
Philosophically,
That's the thing, though. They said that they did take the best players.
They did.
But here's the thing.
fixing it.
If you invite them and then make your team without those players, they didn't even invite them.
Yeah.
So right from the start,
they were
it was
sending
like
a message.
tainted.
That's my point. Is that they didn't bring the best players. Yeah.
But if you bring the best player, like you say, sometimes
Well,
hey,
who's
best
the
players?
top 10? Who's the number 10 pick in this year's draft? You're going to have teams that have different. And I
No, I
don't
agree.
disagree with you. Bring your best players. For sure, they didn't do that, and they were deliberate and they were cocky about it. But there will become a point where you go to Timbits hockey or Pee Wee hockey in Calgary, and you're picking the Div 1 6th defenseman or the Div 2 number 1 defenseman. What's the
Oh yeah, no, I get it. If it was one player, you can say, look, it's a philosophical thing. But the number of high pedigree players they left for guys that don't have high ceilings, who NHL teams see as potential bottom half of roster players, not top of half, that ratio was way out of whack on this roster, and that's why they took heat, not from media idiots like us, but from scouts and prospects.
That's the best part. It wasn't revisionist history. We said this from the moment the roster, the camp roster came out, was you guys are not getting it.
Are we saying this about Team Canada for the Four Nations? Because you could make that argument. Is that so? Those players on Team Canada are the best players available.
There's one or two or three guys you can switch.
What the hell are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about like 9 guys on the junior team, not 3. Edges of rosters is fine. You can substitute a fourth liner and say philosophically
this is Hockey Canada arrogance. You just said take the best players, except when we decide we're going to need role players.
I'm agreeing with you. When you get to the edges of a roster, the difference between that Div 2 number 1 defenseman or the 6th defenseman in Div 1, like that's just opinion between two different people. The edges of the roster, there should be discussion all the time because it's the edge of the roster. The problem is they didn't bring guys that should have been their core players.
Are you saying 9 players? You said 9.
Okay, Zane Perrick not making that team's absolutely insane.
It is.
Crystal
Beckett Seneca.
I'm talking about the Four Nations team. And yours,
I don't think there's an egregious omission there. Like there was there. I bet you there's. I honestly think there's 9.
How did we end up with the non sequitur of Four Nations? What does that have to do with this?
Well, he's just asking if the same issues have plagued the national.
I'm
team.
saying is the same issues for Hockey Canada in the junior. This selection is Anthony Cirelli. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The top guy, like.
If you want a shutdown checking center, he belongs.
That's the point, though, Ryan.
Philosophically,
they're filling spots for roles, not taking the best player.
Canada did not leave. Well, I mean, look, they didn't take Evan Bouchard. Maybe that's a Zane Perrick comparable? I'll give you that. Yeah, like there's just much less consternation about that roster. Like, what did you moan about when it came?
Till they lose,
right? But that's the difference. Hindsight's always 2020. The junior roster got crushed when
this isn't going to be hindsight with Hockey Canada and the World Junior team. It's not. It was foresight. It was quite literally we wrote and said then, how do you not even invite some of these guys to camp? Like let them battle it out at least. And then if you want to pick your team and you say, hey, we had 2 weeks of hockey here and this is what we went with, we'd say, sure, by all means. That was foresight, not hindsight. This time around, with whatever happens at Four Nations, like there's not going to be any second guessing, I don't think, of the team that was picked. It was to your point, Pinder or Rhett, what we're trying to come up with is like the plausible range of like, are you within the circle of like, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And every single player that was picked, even if you want to make the argument for a Hyman or Bouchard or whoever it might be that was left off, Bedard, whoever, the guys that made it, they were all still damn good players. And that's the other part of this World Junior Tournament, is because then the back part of it is, oh, well, you're shitting on these players and they're just teenagers. And that's not actually what we're doing here.
No.
It's all on management and coaching staff.
Agreed. Yeah, the coaching staff is, I don't know that you could have had a worse tournament. You have no practices. You talk about how tired you guys are after you built the camp leading into it. You cancel game day skate. You don't put teammates on the same line that literally are lighting up junior hockey together.
And then when after the tournament have gone back to lighting it up,
you don't give your highest skilled player a look on their top line until you're down 3-1 in an elimination game. You have one of the worst challenges for a goal that you knew wasn't going to overturn with international officiating. Like Dave Cameron, we got the Mars mission for you, buddy. We can't have you in hockey. This is too important. We need civilization in space. You're going to be the first guy from Canada. Fly the flag for us. You're off to Mars. See ya.
Boom. You didn't even need to come in today.
That's some hot takery right there.
Some hot planet.
Sizzling hot take-a-tude.
Feel like that might be clipped.
Maybe.
But honestly, like, could you have had a worse tournament for Dave Cameron?
No.
It's awful.
You could
That's
not.
why the quote from Stephen Ellis was so good. I don't know if you guys saw it, but
we
he
saw
said he got a message from an NHL coach or scout that said, I wouldn't trust Dave Cameron to run a McDonald's drive.
3 a.m. when it's empty.